Hey everyone. As some of you may know, I was born from a surrogate mother, and I count it as one of the greatest blessings of my life to have a life, thanks to the miracle of modern science. Recently, I was in London for a conservative conference, and I was really surprised to meet so many people from all around the world, places like Hungary and France, who were anti-surrogacy lobbyists. It especially surprised me that this was the case at a conservative conference, because I tend to think of surrogacy as one of the most pro-life positions that a person can take. But instead of canceling these individuals, getting mad at them, saying, "How dare you oppose the mechanism of my existence?" I decided to chat with them. And many of them are very nice people with really interesting arguments that all of us need to hear. So today, I'm very pleased to welcome such an individual to my show, Jennifer Lahl, who's the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, and welcome to Timeless and the Julie Hartman YouTube channel in general. In addition to Timeless, which airs Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, you can catch my show with Dennis Prager called Dennis and Julie. That premieres every Monday on this channel at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern. So I encourage you to check all of my pieces of content out, and it is great, as always, to be with you. It is also great to be with Jennifer Lahl. Miss Lahl is a founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network and the co-founder of Stop Surrogacy Now. She has addressed members of the European Parliament in Brussels to address issues of egg trafficking. She has written about this subject for the San Francisco Chronicle, the Dallas Morning News, and the American Journal of Bioethics, and has produced films such as Lines That Divide, The Great Stem Cell Debate, Eggsploitation, Anonymous Father's Day, and Maggie's Story. Hello, Jennifer, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You know, I told a lot of people that I was filming this episode, and I got a lot of individuals saying to me, why would you, as a surrogacy baby, have someone who is anti-surrogacy on your show? And the answer that I gave to them, and I want to make it clear to you and the audience as well, is that, first of all, I want to learn more about your position. I will interview anyone about anything on this show. And second of all, we live during a time when people get so angry when they disagree about very personal issues. And I want to model through my example that I can have someone like you on my show and I don't feel like you're threatening my existence. You know, we often hear when people say that there are only two genders, you're somehow threatening a trans person's existence. Here you are opposing the very mechanism of my existence, and I don't feel threatened by you at all. I'm just very grateful that you're here. So I appreciate your coming on.
Well, thank you. Like you said, we're actually really nice people.
Yes, you are. You really are. I met so many of these individuals in London, and that's how I got connected with you. So this will obviously be the subject of the entire interview. We'll unpack it as we go along. But just to start out, with broad brushstrokes, can you give a synopsis of why you oppose surrogacy and why you've dedicated your entire career to this?
Well, I wouldn't say I've dedicated my entire career to this. This has been a big part of my work. I mean, I've really spent probably the last 2 decades working broadly in the space of what I call third-party conception. So the risk to young women who sell their eggs, the risk to women who opt to be surrogates, and the well-being and the rights and the best interests of the children that are created out of these overwhelmingly contractual commercial arrangements. I don't consider myself anti-surrogacy. I consider myself very pro-maternal child health. I worked as a pediatric critical care nurse for many, many years. I understand the importance of maternal-child bonding, which is normally treated as something really good and important between mother and child. And when I started my work, I began in the space of women who were selling their eggs. I live in California, which has very liberal laws that protect the moneyed interests, but don't protect those that are selling their eggs or renting their wombs. And in my work, I had many young egg donors come to me. I call them egg donors, but in fact, they're egg sellers who'd had their own health severely damaged, harmed, lost their own fertility. A young woman at Stanford, MD, PhD student at the University of California, Irvine, another PhD student, two women that suffered strokes. And in that work, more and more women reached out to me, and that's how I became more connected with women who'd had very unfortunate, bad, and harmful surrogacy pregnancies. I've actually published peer-reviewed research with my colleagues where we took 92 gestational surrogates in the United States through our survey and published the data on that. And we found what other researchers have found. So this isn't the first study, but that surrogate pregnancies, gestational surrogate pregnancies in particular, are much higher risk than a natural pregnancy. So we've set up a situation where there's a lot of money involved, where there's otherwise healthy women who are taking risky drugs, medications, procedures to undergo high-risk situations, put themselves in high-risk situations. And the data is slowly coming out too on the children that are born of this way, and we can maybe get into that. So I really approach this through a strong lens of medical ethics and what is the role of the physician. You know, egg donors aren't patients. Surrogate mothers are not patients. They're doing something to their body that the physician is having them do to their body when there's no medical need for them to do this. And it's also corrupted by money. Where else do you see where you go to your doctor, you're not a patient, and your doctor offers you money to do something with your body? You know, that's sort of reserved for clinical trials and clinical studies where it's very controlled. And, you know, the controls are mostly around the safety of the person that's using their body for a clinical trial. So that's sort of my position. I'm a very pro mother and child woman. I am a woman. I have raised daughters. And I'm critical of medicine.
You mentioned gestational surrogates. I am I was born of a gestational surrogate, which means that my surrogate mother had my parents' embryo implanted in her. So in other words, I am the biological child of my mother and father, but I was just cooked in another oven, as my parents explained it to me when I was growing up. But I think it's important that we define our terms, because there's gestational surrogacy and then there's egg donation surrogacy, where the surrogate mother is also the biological mother of the child. So can you just help us kind of understand these different types and methods of surrogacies, and also what are the laws surrounding them in the United States?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack, and
Right.
I think you're right. We have to be really clear on the language and the terms. I would never reduce a woman down to cooked in an oven. I really kind of cringe when we talk about women as just being just the oven. You know, you'll see the T-shirts, my bun, her oven. You know, I think that's demeaning and sort of denigrates the wonderful maternal-child bonding again, the role that women have as mothers. And I don't like the term traditional, but just for definition, because I don't think there's anything traditional about it. A traditional surrogate is the one who's actually contributing her own egg and her own womb, uterus. So she is both the biological genetic mother as well as the birth mother. In the case of gestational, again, I hate that word, they're women. These are birthing mothers, birthing women. They're not gestational. That sounds like an aircraft carrier. I just flew in on the gestational carrier. So, you know, in that sense, the woman is supposedly just providing her womb to grow the baby that's not genetically related to her. But we know in the field of epigenetics, and we've seen now as we've understood more, because we've had more and more children and women who have been surrogates, that we can't dismiss the role of the birth mother in the case of the woman who gave birth to you. If not for her contribution for 9 months, she wouldn't be here. So she's not just an oven. And we know that the baby's blood and the mother's blood is going back and forth through the 9 months of pregnancy.
Forgive me for interrupting. I'm so sorry, but when you say the mother's blood, in the case of a gestational surrogate, do you mean the carrier's blood or the biological mother's blood?
No, the surrogate.
I see. Okay.
her blood. It's going through the placenta, that's going through the umbilical cord, back and forth and back and forth. So for 9 months, how is a baby growing in the womb? She's growing through the nourishment of the woman who's, gestating that baby. So their blood is going back and forth. And we've seen now on autopsy of both the birth mother or the surrogate, or if your term, the gestational surrogate or gestational carrier, and the baby, those cells are still there. Now, those cells that are living on and on, between the baby and the birth mother are not the cells that choose your eye color or choose your medical history. That comes from the DNA of the egg donor and the sperm donor, or the genetic father or genetic mother.
I understand your position, though I respectfully disagree that it's reducing women. First of all, when my parents talked to me about my surrogate mother when I was little, they did use that term, baked in another oven, but they didn't mean it at all as somehow being disparaging of my surrogate or reducing her to an oven. They were trying to explain a very difficult, complicated concept to a 5-year-old daughter who doesn't, understand fully. So I just want to make that clear that was how it was explained when I was younger. But as I've gotten older, I know my parents and we are so grateful to my surrogate mother. We don't just think of her as like a, one and done person who delivered this utility service to us and moved on. We often talk about the miracle of modern science and the blessing of her coming into my life, especially given the fact that there's a huge age difference between me and my older siblings. Well, maybe not huge, but significant, 8 and 9 years. And for those 8 and 9 years, my mother was doing IVF. She was, they were doing all these different rounds of testing with 2 gestational surrogates. Several embryos failed. And so we often remark about the miracle of this event, and at the center of that miracle being a person who is willing to help my family give me life.
Well, yes, I understand talking to children in age-appropriate language, but the whole marketing all over social media, those are the phrases, her bun, my oven, just the easy bake oven, baking cupcakes. That's the language that's used across the board, not just when you're talking to a 4 or 5-year-old or explaining how they came to be. Now, it's wonderful that your parents found this woman to help them. But again, it gets me back to the risks. Surrogate pregnancies are high risk. I know I have interviewed on my YouTube channel, men who've lost their wives that have died from complications related to surrogate pregnancies. We've had 2, if not 3, women in California that have died of surrogate pregnancies. A woman in Idaho was carrying twins for a couple in Spain, where most of European countries, this is illegal there. And she died, as well as the couple, the 2 twins from Spain, the Spanish babies died as well. So when people say, well, she helped us and we're so grateful and we're so happy, and I say, well, that's wonderful, but I don't ever want to be in a position where I ask another woman to do something for me that might risk her life. Michelle Reeves in California had a husband and has 2 young children, and they lost their mom. He lost his wife. I don't think medicine has any role in asking a woman, again, she's not a patient, the surrogate mother's not a patient, to do something that's high risk. I don't know how much your parents paid the surrogate mother.
A lot.
I'm assuming they did.
A lot.
And how medicine really corrupts informed consent and decision making when you're not a patient. Again, why are these women doing this? And in my own research in America, where we don't have the poverty that we have in Thailand or India or some of the third world countries, in our own research looking at American gestational surrogates, these are women that are in the low to tax tiers. These are overwhelmingly financially disadvantaged women. They're overwhelmingly, in our own research, partnered with husbands or boyfriends or significant others that have high school GED level education. It's the haves and the have-nots, and so we're putting women in a situation where the marketing is you're helping build a family, you're an angel, but they're putting themselves in harm's way. If you take the money out of it, I was very involved in the New York State battle to legalize commercial gestational surrogacy. And up until they passed a law during COVID under Governor Cuomo's governorship, altruistic surrogacy was legal. So women could be surrogates in the state of New York for forever, since the beginning of surrogacy, as long as they weren't paid, just like organ donation. But the argument put forward by the legislators in New York State is women weren't lining up to do this for free. So there's a small sliver of people that will help their sister or help their girlfriend or help a stranger and not expect to be compensated. But if you take the money out of it, women are not going to line up to do 9 months of a pregnancy, high-risk pregnancy, risk their health, risk their life for free.
Okay, so there are two arguments I'm hearing here, and I want to address them separately. The first is that carrying a child as a surrogate mother is high risk, and you're saying has led to a lot of medical complications and in some cases death. That's argument number one. And then argument number two is it's inherently coercive of women because without the money incentive, they wouldn't put their body through this for 9 months. Do I understand that correctly?
I would put a little bit of a spin on that, in that it's unethical for medicine to be paying people large sums of money to do things with their body that there's no medical need for. But I'm just saying, as a point of, when you look at the informed consent process, we know, because I worked in nursing, university hospitals, I worked at UC San Francisco, UCLA, Children's Hospital in Oakland. You don't put money on the table when you're giving informed consent, because we know that informed consent, when it's coupled with money, is not a freely given consent. You're being told, you need this, we want you to do this, and there's some risks over here, but oh, by the way, here's a big fat check. And you'll look at that big fat check, and the more you need that money, even if you're told the risks, you will discount those risks because you need that money. So money is never involved in part of the informed consent. But yes, my two biggest arguments are, one, it is a surrogate pregnancy, a gestational surrogate pregnancy is much higher risk than a woman's own natural pregnancy with her own children. And that's well documented in many studies, not just my own research. So that's full stop.
Sorry, go ahead.
So that, I was going to say, that's full stop reason number one. And then reason number two is medical doctors have no business asking people who aren't patients to do risky things with their body, especially corrupted by medicine. Especially corrupted by offering them money. Where do you ever see a doctor ask you to do something that you have no medical need to? They don't say, hey, you want to take chemotherapy and you don't have cancer? You want to take antibiotics and you don't have pneumonia? You want stitches and you don't have a laceration that needs sutured? Medicine's never asking you to do something with your body when you don't have a medical need for it. But in this case, these women, egg donors and surrogates, are asked to do very potentially dangerous, life-threatening things to their body that they have no medical need to do.
Okay, again, let's address these separately. Let's start with the first argument about the risk of gestational surrogates performing this function. I know that you don't like that kind of way of labeling it, but it is a fact that they are performing a function. That's not all of what they're doing. They have a great, I think, spiritual worth, and they're performing a magnificent, life-giving thing, but it is, at the end of the day, also a function. So let's start with that. Can you give me some data on the dangers of gestational surrogates? Out of all of the gestational surrogates in a given year, for instance, how many die? How many have serious medical complications?
Well, that's the dirty little secret, because surrogate mothers aren't tracked in a database. When you look at like organ donors, if you're an organ donor, you will forever be tracked and live in an organ donor base. If you receive an organ, if you're a transplant recipient, you will forever be in a database. Same with egg donors and surrogates. We're not tracking these women in any central database or even a statewide database. Even on birth certificates, in California, we're a state where when a surrogate mother signs her legal contract, before she's even pregnant, she's waived her maternal rights. So her name never even appears on a birth certificate. So it's really hard to say how many. I mean, the way we find it out, and the data that we got in our particular research was we surveyed women who we ran ads. We just said, we're researchers, we're looking to speak to gestational surrogates in the United States. Let us know if you want to be part of our study. One important study was done at a Loma Linda Hospital in Southern California, and it was a retrospective study where they just went back to their own medical records of women that were in Loma Linda Hospital for a 1-year period of time that were they knew from the medical records that they were pregnant as surrogates. So that's the way that we have to collect the data, because we're not tracking these women. So, like, for example, Michelle Reeves, who was a gestational surrogate in Southern California who died a few years ago, she died of an amniotic embolism, complications of an amniotic embolism, which is very fatal. And of course, her death certificate, I don't know what it recorded. Did it just say died of an amniotic embolism, or did it say gestational surrogate mother who died of so when you want to go back and look at like records where women have died that happened to be pregnant, does it actually say that they died as a result of a surrogate pregnancy complication? Same with Brooke Brown in Idaho. She died of placenta abruption. So her death certificate might have just recorded it as a death related to placental abruption versus, a complication of a surrogate pregnancy that resulted in death by a placental abruption. So that's sort of the problem with data collection, that saying, what doesn't count doesn't get counted. And it gets back to, we already know in the United States as being a very developed country, we have horrible maternal morbidity and mortality rates for, such a developed and wealthy nation. I mean, it's scandalous how bad our maternal mortality and morbidity rates are. Now, as far as the actual risks, so what we know, again, from the research that's already been done, is that these surrogate mothers have higher rates of preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, maternal hypertension. And as a pediatric critical care nurse, I know that when a mother is in a high-risk pregnancy, that the children that she's pregnant with, whether it be a singleton or twins or triplets, and we know surrogates are often encouraged to carry multiples, we know that the babies are at risk too. So like the Loma Linda study was really important because it actually tracked the fact that these women were in high-risk pregnancy settings. They had to be admitted to high-risk pregnancy centers for, weeks before birth. Surrogates have a higher rate of preterm labor, even if they're carrying a singleton baby. So we know that, babies that are born premature have low birth weights, they have long stays in the NICU, and they have potentially lots of, longer term risks and complications just by the nature of being born premature.
I have no doubt that this happens. I have no doubt that there are medical complications with gestational surrogate mothers and even deaths. The question, though, and I understand you say that the data on this is not well compiled or it's not tracked as much as it should be, but the question is really, how common is this? Because let's look, for instance, at driving cars. There are a lot of people who die or get very seriously injured in car accidents, but there are far, far, far many multiples of that, more people who drive cars safely. And so we look at the car driving situation and we go, okay, the benefits of driving a car outweigh the costs. The fact that most people do this safely and it serves a function and is immensely convenient and elevates your quality of life, that outweighs the fact that it also comes with grave danger. That is the same standard that I apply to surrogacy. Things are going to happen, and of course when those things happen they are terrible, but really, how common is it?
Well, I've just said that it's really hard to know how common it is because we don't track. But I get back and I go, okay, I made a movie called Exploitation, which features, I think, 5 or 6 women who sold their eggs. 2 lost their ability, will never be able to have children of their own, ever. 1 died of cancer that her mother, who's a medical doctor, can't prove, but thinks it's highly likely it's through the high-dose fertility drugs. Two of the women in my film had strokes. These are all women who sold their eggs one time. And I kind of go, well, how many people? How many people have to be harmed for you to say, well, maybe we shouldn't ask women to do things that are harmful? But to your point on driving a car, I mean, I don't think that driving a car is similar to pregnancy. Yes, there's risks in everything. I get this all the time. Well, there's risks in everything. There's risks in everything. Of course, there's risks in everything. But when you just take your car example, so since we know it's really risky, we have all kinds of laws and protections. You can't speed. You can't be texting on your phone. You have to wear a seatbelt. You have to have a car that's supposedly, been licensed and approved and safe to drive on the streets here. You can't drive drunk. There's all kinds, and you have to have insurance. And if you crash in and you injure somebody, you're at fault. There. And I'm not making a case for these kind of protections to be put in surrogacy, because at the end of the day, I go, what kind of law or protection could you put in place that would be able to, you could look at Michelle Reeves' husband and say, if we'd only had this law, your wife would still be alive.
Well,
if we only had this law, these little boys and girls, your mom would still be here.
But we do have laws with surrogacy. I'm so sorry. I have a rule that I never interrupt my guests, but sometimes there's a lag. I'm so sorry. One more time. There's a lag. Go ahead.
Yeah. What was the question?
The point that I was bringing up, and again, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I couldn't hear what you were saying there at the end, but you're saying we have all these laws for cars, but we do have these laws for surrogacy. I mean, I know from my parents' experience and the amount that they have talked to me that there were, monthly or bi-monthly doctor's appointments, and obviously the implantation of the embryo is done by this isn't done like in a garage, with some people who may know something about implanting embryos. This is a highly regulated, medically overseen process. And again, it is horrible that in some cases, there are some surrogates who die and get complications from it, just as it is horrible in the cases of driving cars that some people do drive drunk and do text and kill themselves and kill other people. But the question again is, how common is it? And there are laws with regard to surrogacy that do regulate it and do, as in the case of driving, make those calamities, those tragedies less common.
Well, I'm going to try to answer your question, but there's just a really bad lag and you keep freezing. So I think I heard what you're saying. But I don't take the point that a pregnancy is just like driving a car. I mean, this is, again, you have to go to the medical doctor, and the medical doctor is supposed to have your health and your, well-being at first, his foremost and concern. And he shouldn't be putting you in a position that even puts you in harm's way. It'd be like getting in your, letting a minor child who doesn't have a license go and get in the car and drive to school. We would stop right there and go, no, you can't do this. You should not be doing this. You are, young woman, you're a mother, you have your whole life ahead of you. You shouldn't be doing this thing that you have no reason to do other than mostly the money that we're going to pay you to do this. You shouldn't be doing it. So I just full stop. I don't equate pregnancy as work. There's a lot of people that say, it's surrogacy, yes, it's high risk. Well, let's treat them like firemen and let's treat them like policemen so that they can, be paid a lot of money and they can have big insurance policies and they can have pensions. And the minute you try to introduce this kind of legislation, you will watch the big fertility industry howl and complain, because all these costs that put in protections to surrogate mothers or women who sell their eggs are punted onto the intended parents or to the fertility industry or the fertility doctors. And they don't want to give up any of their profits to put in any kind of risk. But back to the point that these are high risk, pregnancies like a fireman or something, I go, this doesn't work. Pregnancy is not a job. No little girl goes to the high school job career counseling and says, when I grow up, I want to be a paid gestational surrogate. What do I have to study in school to do that? And, a surrogate can only do a few surrogacies and then she ages out. An egg donor can only sell her eggs 6 times per the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. So these aren't jobs that you can do and you should be compensated because it's some high risk thing that you're doing. No, it's pregnancy.
Before we continue with Jennifer, I want to tell you about MyPillow. MyPillow is excited to bring you their biggest bedding sale ever, just in time for Christmas. Get the Giza Dream bed sheets for as low as $29.98. A set of pillowcases only for $9.98. Rejuvenate your bed with a MyPillow mattress topper for as low as $99.99. They also have blankets in a variety of sizes, colors, and styles. They even have blankets for your pets. Get duvets, quilts, down comforters, body pillows, bolster pillows, and so much more, all with the biggest discounts ever. They're also extending their money-back guarantee for Christmas until March 1st, 2024, making them the perfect gifts for your friends, your family, and everyone you know. So go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Hartman or call 1-800-566-6745 and you'll get big discounts on all MyPillow bedding products, including the Giza Dream bed sheets for as low as $29.98, and get all your shopping done now while quantities last. Right, but look what's coming out of it. All of these opportunities at life. I would never be here if it weren't for my gestational surrogate. And again, I hear you that, you say that there's not effectively compiled data on this, but to me, I have not seen convincing evidence that the deaths and the complications are widespread enough to really call this into question, especially in the United States when it is very heavily regulated and it is done with a, massive medical oversight or doctors overseeing the process. And so, again, I know that you take issue with kind of this idea of the pregnancy being a job and this kind of cost-benefit analysis that I'm giving. But at the end of the day, we're in the modern world. And if I could wave a magic wand and create a perfect world, I wouldn't have these labels assigned to the spiritual wonder of a pregnant woman. But at the end of the day, it is performing a great service and it is giving people an opportunity at a life. And just because that seems very transactional, I don't think that that is enough of an argument to negate the fact that it is giving the greatest gift in the world to a family and to the individual who is born.
Yeah, but I think, what would have happened if your parents had hired a surrogate and she died and you died?
Right, but that didn't happen. And in millions, or perhaps not millions, but hundreds of thousands of cases, that doesn't happen. It's done safely. The child is given to the parents. That child has a life. The parent has another son or daughter, and the surrogate is like feeling great about herself for having provided that service.
Do you have a relationship with your birth mother? Do you know her? Have you met her?
I don't feel comfortable talking about the specifics of my relationship with my surrogate mother, in part because I have not asked for her permission to talk about her specifically. But I can.
But I just asked, have you met her? Do you know her?
Well, I've met her in the sense that I have been in her womb for 9 months. But no, I don't feel comfortable talking about the specifics of my case, again, because there are a lot of people involved who I don't want to cross lines with. But
and that's why I feel very comfortable talking about the specific cases of women that have been harmed. But
what do you mean by harm? Do you mean like medically harmed? They have a disease, they have an illness, they have an ailment, or do you mean psychologically and emotionally harmed? Or both?
I mean both. I mean,
right.
if you're a surrogate who's died, you cannot say that she has not been harmed. I mean, she was harmed to the point where she lost her life.
No, of course that's true. But again, the vast majority of these individuals are not dying.
I don't think you can say the vast majority. I don't think either one of us can, because like I said, what doesn't count doesn't count. We don't count them. And how many do you need to be hurt? I mean, I could probably find 50 women if I just, ran through my contact list, 50 women that had various things that had been done to them through surrogacy that hurt them.
Well, how many people do we need hurt to stop driving cars? you know?
How many people do we need hurt to stop smoking cigarettes? I
Right.
mean, we work like crazy to get people to don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke. And in reality, very few people die of lung cancer. Very few people, but we have these huge educational campaigns. Don't smoke, don't smoke, don't smoke. And I agree, don't smoke. Don't do things that are harmful to your life. But I think it's interesting that you want to talk about generically how wonderful it is, and that you don't want to even talk about, even without disclosing any kind of information, your own birth mother, because you just want to protect her. You don't want to talk about that. You probably don't want to talk about how much your parents paid her, except for you said a lot. It gets to the fact that we are just erasing these women. We refer them down to carriers, to ovens, to these, we don't care if they're harmed, because most women aren't harmed, but the ones that are, well, okay, that's just okay, that's just a risk that, like you take when you drive your car. I don't want to live in that world. I am a strong proponent of maternal child health and maternal child bonding, and the fact that medicine should be in the business of do no harm. And this is not do no harm medicine.
So, okay, so you were saying a few seconds ago that you take issue with the fact that I don't want to talk about my relationship with my surrogate or how much money my parents paid her. First of all, those are personal things that I don't need to disclose to you or to anyone. I can keep those private. And second of all, I don't really think those things necessarily matter. This was all done legally. This was all above board. Both parties are happy with it. And so I don't quite understand the argument. And let's say in the case of my surrogate or in the case of other surrogates that the surrogate mother walked away feeling some kind of emotional damage. Does that mean that the whole thing shouldn't have happened and that the child shouldn't have been born? Again, in other words, like, we have to weigh the costs and we have to weigh the benefit. Let's say a surrogate walks away feeling postpartum depression, for instance, as a result of being a gestational surrogate. Would you say, you know what, that is enough of a cost to wipe away the whole benefit of that surrogate giving a life to this child?
Yeah. And it's interesting that you brought up postpartum depression, because in our own research, we showed that women had higher rates of postpartum depression with their surrogate pregnancies than they did with their own children. And I think some of that, again, back to the maternal child bonding, the surrogate mother goes home from the hospital with empty arms and, just that feeling of where's the baby, her breasts are all primed to make milk, to feed a baby. Part of postpartum healing is in that aftercare with nursing and mother-child bonding that helps, bond the baby to the mother to the baby, and also promotes healing of the uterus after labor and delivery and 9 months of pregnancy. So, I'd love to say to people, I can probably find so many different reasons why people could object to surrogacy. But again, for me, it gets back to the role of, proper medicine and do no harm, and the corruption of money. Because I do think it's buying and selling of children. I mean, I've read enough surrogate contracts, overwhelmingly contracts that have been drafted and executed in the state of California, which is where I live. And all throughout the contract is, punitive language on, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, then the money stops. The money has to be paid back. You owe us money. So it's tied to the money by the contracts. So that. But if you're somebody who's worried about economic justices and injustices, well, it's going to be lower income women. You'll never see a famous celebrity on the cover of People magazine who's the surrogate for her housekeeper. It's the haves and the have-nots. If you're concerned about maternal child health and maternal child bonding and maternal child well-being, this surrogacy can be problematic for you. If you're concerned about, just health risks and doing something, again, when you're not a patient, then I think people could kind of say, yeah, we shouldn't encourage people to do things with their bodies, and doctors certainly shouldn't be encouraged in this. And it's great. I know you're happy to be here, and I'm sure your parents love you, and that's wonderful. But I always say, well, then you were one of the lucky ones. You're like one of the smokers who smoked but didn't ever get lung cancer. You're one of the people who ate a horrible diet but remains thin your whole life, because you just have a metabolism. You're lucky that, that everything went well and then you had a great outcome and you're here and you're thriving and you're hosting your own, podcast. But what about the people who didn't turn out with a happy story?
You mean the children or the mothers or both?
All of them.
Well,
I've
again,
met intended parents. I have talked to intended parents who they got the child and the surrogate died.
Right. Look, I hear your position. I hear your position, but to me, it is not an adequate argument to, again, for me, perhaps it will be for audience members. That's why I'm having you on, because people can draw their own conclusions. But I do not view it as an adequate argument to say, well, your story ended up great, but there were a lot of mothers and children and biological parents who walked out of this feeling not so great. Again, I have not been presented with sufficient evidence which shows that these disaster stories are outweighing the beautiful stories. And it's a cost benefit analysis, really, at the end of the day. Everything in life is a cost benefit analysis. Getting in a car, getting on an airplane, working a certain job, traveling to a certain country. You have to assess the cost and the benefits. And so, again, the evidence has not been presented to me that there are enough costs. I also want to ask, because we keep going back to this.
Have you really looked for the evidence, though?
I'm sorry?
I'm curious if you really looked for the evidence, because it's out there.
Well, you just told me that the evidence and the data is not well collected and we don't know the whole story. So it's either out there or it's not.
No, I've told you that there's many peer-reviewed studies that show that surrogate pregnancies are very high risk. Now, when you ask me specifically how many women have died, that's where we're lacking, because we don't track these deaths in a meaningful way that we can capture them as surrogacy-related deaths. But the data is out there overwhelmingly that this is a high-risk endeavor. And when you talk about risk-benefit analysis, the beauty of the Loma Linda study was it actually looked at the finances and how much these high-risk surrogate pregnancies are actually costing the university, which, the cost goes on to the insurance companies, which goes on to all of us. So, there is an economic argument to be made. I don't make that one in particular because I'm more concerned with doctors not harming people.
I'm very curious what your position is on certain jobs that people have, in mining or working in factories where they're in certain environments where they can get limbs chopped off, or where they're inhaling toxic fumes and they're getting paid to do that. What is your position on those jobs? Do you think that they should not be allowed to partake in that profession?
No, you're asking me that question because you're wanting me to, you're conflating surrogacy with a job. I reject that surrogacy is a job. I reject that a woman that your parents hired and paid was an employee and that she was paid as an employee to do a job. I reject that argument. Now, if you want to talk about vocational jobs, like I said, you can grow up and be a little boy and say, I want to be a fireman, or a little girl, I want to be a policewoman. And you can vocationally go off and get trained for that job. And you go to work every day and you do that job. And at the end of many, many years, you retire and you have a pension. That's a job. Pregnancy is not a job. So I reject that conflation of those two categories. Pregnancy is pregnancy.
So can you outline how that's not a job for a woman to willingly enter into an agreement? And by the way, again, we're talking, I know all over the world, I've read horror stories about how it's not heavily, regulated, and these women are promised certain things, including money, and then they're extorted. I'm talking about here in the United States, specifically in my case and other cases where a woman enters into a contractual agreement. There are surrogacy agencies, there are lawyers, my God, on both sides. The woman agrees to go into this and get paid a sum of money. How is that not a job? Yes, she's getting pregnant, but her pregnancy is the job. How is it not to you?
Well, the job you can do for decades. You know, a fireman or
Well,
a
not every
policeman or
job.
a
You can't do
school
every
teacher
job
or
for
a
decades.
physician or a lawyer.
I hope I do this show for decades, but I may
Okay,
not
well,
do
this
it
is
for decades. I may get booted next week. The definition of a job is not that you have to do it for
and there's
decades.
things that we do. You know, it's when you're a mother. You know, when you're outside in the backyard playing with your children as a mother, are you doing a job? No, you're being a mother.
Right, but again, this is you're talking about a different situation. We're talking about a woman who through a surrogacy agency and through
I
legal
thought we were talking
agreements.
about surrogacy.
I'm sorry? We're talking
No, I
about
said
a
I thought we were
woman.
talking about surrogacy.
We're talking about a woman who entered into a contractual agreement willingly and knowingly to get paid money to have an embryo implanted in her and carry that to term. How is that not a job?
There's such a bad lag time. You keep freezing, and
Oh, I'm sorry.
am I freezing too?
Sometimes a little bit, but it's just more of a lag. But it's okay. I'm hearing you and seeing you well.
Yeah, sometimes. Okay. What was the question again?
I'm saying, how is it not a job for a woman? Because look, I'm looking at this on principle, and if you're using the argument that, well, it's coercive for a woman to get paid a sum of money to do something with her body that she otherwise would not have done, then my question is, well, how is that different from many other types of labor, which are arguably more risky? I mean, I was just driving here and there was this construction worker scaling this building with a rope. Do you allow construction workers to scale buildings with ropes, but then somehow a surrogate is different?
I think you're misunderstanding. I mean, my objection is a surrogate doesn't get pregnant without a doctor. I mean, who puts the embryo up in the surrogate? Who gets the eggs out of your mother's body? Who gets the sperm? Who creates the embryos in the lab? Who transfers the embryos? Who monitors the surrogate mother through her pregnancy? None of this is happening without a physician. And this is outside of the bounds and purview of medicine. So this isn't about a job, because when you go to work, you don't need a doctor to get you to your job. You don't need a doctor to put medicine in you to get you to be able to do your job, or you shouldn't. So they're different tasks, and you cannot become a surrogate or you cannot become an egg donor without a doctor, and this is not the domain of medicine. Now, if you want to say that medicine can just do whatever the heck they want, which is we're seeing in the transgender debate, they're chopping off healthy reproductive organs. They're putting children on hormones that are dangerous and harmful. And, we've already seen medicine kind of going corrupt. But there are some things that are not supposed to be done to people that aren't patients. Why don't we let organ donors sell their kidneys? Why can't an organ donor contractually with a lawyer agree to sell their kidney and give it to these people? And here's a contract that I'm agreeing to sell my kidney. We say no. Why? Because we don't want people who are not patients to make decisions about their health and their bodily well-being for money, because who will be selling their kidneys? The lower income poor people to the wealthy who can afford to buy. And that is why medicine doesn't allow the buying and selling of organs for transplant, even though we know every 13 minutes, the time that we've been yammering here together and talking back and forth, probably 6 or 7 people have died waiting for an organ donation. And we don't go, oh my God, people are dying. We have to let people sell their kidneys. But no, when somebody can't have a baby, we go, oh, well, we have to be able to pay people to sell their eggs and rent their wombs because they have to have a baby. It's not the domain of medicine.
Okay, again, I'm just really, for clarity's sake, just trying to understand the principle here about this argument of what's not in the domain of medicine. So if I understand your argument, and obviously correct me or clarify if I'm summarizing this incorrectly, you say that doctors should not be doing unnecessary things to patients.
No. The surrogate's not a patient. She's not a patient.
Okay, well, okay, so then, okay, well,
She
okay,
shouldn't have
putting
anything
the
done to
patient
her.
word aside, doctors should not be doing unnecessary things to people. So let me
Yeah,
ask
that
you
they
this
have no
question.
medical
Do
need,
you do
that
you
they have no
allow
medical need for.
Okay, well, let's look at plastic surgery. There's no medical need for plastic surgery. Would you allow
Absolutely,
someone
I agree. I agree.
would you allow someone
I
to get
agree.
plastic surgery?
I well, okay, they're doing that to their own body. No, I don't think that's the domain of medicine.
So you would
So
would
I
would you
would
try to
say
ban plastic surgery?
no, it's not my jam. We're all put on this earth to do different things.
Right, but you
Some
just
people are
said
worried about.
that they are doing that to their own bodies. Well, the surrogate is doing that to their own bodies. Again, I'm trying to get
No,
down
but
to the
I
principle
said
here.
that it shouldn't. I said that it shouldn't be something that medicine should be doing. Now, I'm
Like,
not going to
but
set up a
why?
cause to ban plastic surgery
But let's get
because
down
there's
to the
no medical
principle.
need.
Why?
Go. You go to your hairdresser to get your hair done. I color my hair. I got fresh highlights the other day.
They
I
look
don't go
great.
to a medical doctor for this. These are like cosmetic things. Women go and get their, you know, Botox or their, I don't know, whatever.
Right,
But it's
but
not medicine. Medicine is in the healing business. It's treating, healing, alleviating suffering, curing diseases, curing cancer, removing gallbladders that are full of stones. It's in the healing business.
But if you would allow doctors to do something that is unnecessary in the case of plastic surgery, what you deem to be, medically unnecessary,
No,
why wouldn't you allow
I'm
it with
not in the
surrogacy?
space. No, I'm not in the space of plastic surgery. I'm telling you, it's not medicine. But I'm not going to set up a cause like I run the Stop Surrogacy Now campaign because I'm committed to maternal child health and the health and benefit of mothers and babies. Now, if somebody else wants to start a cause about world hunger or plastic surgery or no more plastic, all these other causes, that's fine. But I'm just telling you, plastic surgery for cosmetic purposes is not medicine. Now,
But
if you've
it
been a
involves
severely
medicine.
if you've been a severely burned patient and you need to have plastic surgery to repair your face so that you can eat or do whatever, then that's medicine because it's healing, it's curative, it's prevention of disease.
Okay. Look, as my dear friend and co-host Dennis Prager says, clarity over agreement. Clearly, we don't agree, but what I'm trying to do,
No.
but what I'm trying to do here is seek clarity, and I have to say I'm just a bit confused by your changing definition of what constitutes something medical. So you're saying medicine always has to be healing.
No, medicine can't always be healing because there's people that die even though medicine is trying to heal. But that is the domain of medicine, to treat illness, to alleviate suffering, to repair damaged body. It's all about healing when there's a sickness or an injury. That's medicine.
Okay. Again, clarity over agreement. So let's talk a little bit in our final few minutes about an issue or a situation that I heard of when I was doing some research on this. And I have to say, it really rocked me. And that was a case of a woman, or excuse me, a couple who implanted 3 embryos into a gestational surrogate. Again, this was a above board contractual agreement of a surrogate taking this on and parents trying to plant these 3 embryos. And all 3 of the embryos took. So the gestational surrogate was pregnant with triplets. And then the parents said, well, we actually don't want triplets. We want 1, maybe 2. So we would like you, the gestational surrogate, to get an abortion abort one of those 3 embryos. That is a very, we disagree on a lot of things, but, if this is kind of the lane of your advocacy, dealing with situations like this, I have no problem with it and cheer it on, because that, I think, is unethical to want to require a gestational surrogate to abort one of the, in this case, 3 embryos, because the biological parents don't want 3 kids. But it raises these really interesting questions, like, is it now the woman's body, her choice, or is it the biological parents' contract, their choice? Those are very muddy waters. What do you have to say about those situations? And does your advocacy involve trying to prevent such cases from arising?
Yeah, I mean, because I've always am reading the contracts that these women sign, and that language is overwhelmingly included in surrogate contracts. It's under the heading of either selective reduction or termination, where surrogates are asked to reduce down the pregnancy, or they're asked to terminate the pregnancy altogether. And these are contracts that I've read that have already been signed, meaning the surrogate has agreed to do that. We've had a couple of very high-profile cases, like this scenario of triplet pregnancies in California, and one actually got all the way to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court didn't hear it. And what happens is these women agree to doing this. It's kind of like all the things we do. We take risks and we think, oh, it won't happen to me. I'll smoke, I won't get cancer. I'll get on that plane, it's not going to crash. We take that risk. And women, because they need the money, they go, well, this is probably going to happen, so sure, I'll sign and agree to do it. And then when they're actually faced with doing it, a lot of times they have a moral, quandary that they put themselves into. And again, for your listeners, all the regulations you talk about that are out there to protect, they don't protect the surrogates. So which is why they find their way to me and say, can you help me? Because I went back to the lawyer who drafted the contract that I executed, and the lawyer said, oh no, the intended parents hired me, so they paid me, so I actually really represent the intended parents. My job was just to sort of walk you through the contract, make sure you understand it, and have you sign it. So they don't have any legal representation, and of course they don't have any money, because that's why they're doing surrogacy. And so we have to find them pro bono help. So far, we haven't gotten so callous in the United States where we're strapping women down and forcing them to terminate or reduce down their pregnancies. But most of the women that I know, and I know quite a few that have been in this situation, have given birth. But again, because maternal rights have been waived, a lot of these women live with kind of angst because they don't know whatever becomes of the babies. They give birth and the babies are taken away. Do the intended parents keep all 3 when they only wanted 1?
Right.
Did they keep 2 and give 1 away? Whatever happened to these babies, oftentimes they don't know. So I do have a hard stop.
I know you do. Don't worry. We're wrapping it up. Jennifer, very interesting discussion. I really appreciate your coming on and arguing your position.
Thank you.
Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, I think I'm really most active on Twitter. So if people want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Jennifer Lahl. And I'm also on Instagram, but I'm really active on Twitter. So that's the best way if people want to reach out to me or connect, or I can send people studies that I mentioned or whatever. Sure.
Okay. Thanks so much again. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great Christmas.
Thanks. You too. And thanks to all of you so much for watching. A lot of stuff, my gosh, discussed in this episode. I would be so eager to hear your thoughts. So please comment down below with what you think. And as always, you can email me at julie@julie-hartman.com. Take care. I'll see you soon.